I think I didn't do anything wrong, just tried to fix my marriage in my own way. So why am I the one getting served divorce papers at work? All I ever wanted was for him to notice me, to fight for me. But now everyone's looking at me like I'm the villain. I never thought it would end like this, with a lawyer instead of an apology. The kitchen felt smaller every morning, like the walls were closing in on our routine. Graham sat hunched over his laptop, coffee growing cold beside him, fingers clicking away at some IT problem that seemed more important than looking at his wife. I stood at the counter, making Maya's lunch, waiting for him to notice my new blouse, the blue one that used to make him smile. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Maya needs new school shoes, I said, testing the waters. Click, click, click. Graham. What? Oh yeah, shoes. Put it on the card. 8 years old, and our daughter Maya had learned to eat her cereal quietly, sensing the tension that hung between us like smoke. She glanced between us with those big brown eyes, Graham's eyes, before slipping away to get her backpack. You know what your problem is? I finally snapped, slamming the lunchbox shut. You're never present. Even when you're here, you're not really here. Graham looked up then, blinking like he'd forgotten I existed. Leah, I'm working. The Henderson account. There's always an account. Always something more important than your family. He closed the laptop with a sigh that made me want to scream. That's not fair. Everything I do is for this family. But it wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough for months. When was the last time he'd really looked at me? When had he last made me feel like a woman instead of just Maya's mom and his roommate who split the bills? At work, I found myself complaining to Cleo during our coffee break. She nodded sympathetically, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her mug. Honey, you're still young and beautiful, she said. Graham doesn't know what he has. Maybe he needs a wake-up call. I thought about that as I organized files in my cubicle. A wake-up call. Something to remind him that other men found me attractive, that he shouldn't take me for granted. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from Larson Bell, my boss. Great work on the Morrison files. Mind staying late tonight? I'd like to discuss your potential for advancement. I smiled, my heart doing a little flutter. Larson had always been charming, the kind of man who remembered your birthday and complimented your hair. At 43, he had that confident, successful energy that Graham seemed to have lost somewhere between our wedding and Maya's birth. Of course, happy to discuss my future here, I typed back. When I got home that night, Graham was helping Maya with homework at the kitchen table. They looked up when I walked in, and for a moment I felt a pang of something. Guilt? But then Graham went right back to explaining fractions, barely acknowledging that I'd worked late. How was your day? He asked absently. Productive. Larson thinks I have potential for advancement. That's good. He didn't even look up. Later, after Maya was in bed, I tried to initiate something, anything, with Graham. I sat closer to him on the couch, ran my fingers along his arm. He patted my hand like I was a pet. I'm tired, Leah. Long day. Always tired. Always distracted. Always somewhere else. My phone buzzed. Thanks again for staying late. You're an asset to this company. Sweet dreams, Eulalia. No one called me by my full name anymore. It sounded elegant, sophisticated, like I was someone worth noticing. I smiled in the dark, next to my sleeping husband, and wondered what tomorrow might bring. What would it hurt to feel appreciated for once? Graham clearly didn't care enough to notice anyway, but as I drifted off to sleep, a small voice in my head whispered, "What if he finds out?" Larson's office had floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything feel important, powerful. I smoothed my skirt as I knocked on his doorframe, my pulse quickening when he looked up and smiled. "Eulalia, come in, close the door." The way he said my name made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I settled into the chair across from his desk, crossing my legs carefully. "I've been watching your work," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You have instincts that can't be taught. Natural talent." Heat crept up my neck. "Thank you. I've always tried to go above and beyond. It shows. In fact, I think you're underutilized here. A woman with your qualities should be in a more visible position." His eyes lingered on me in a way that wasn't entirely professional, and I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. This was what I'd been missing, being desired, appreciated, seen as more than just a wife and mother. My phone buzzed. "Graham, Maya's running a fever. Can you pick up medicine on your way home?" I glanced at the message and turned my phone face down. Maya probably just had a minor cold. Graham could handle it. "Sorry," I said to Larson. "Where were we?" "I was thinking we should discuss your future over dinner, somewhere we can talk freely, without office distractions." "That sounds professional," I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely about work. Over the next few weeks, our interactions became a bright spot in my increasingly gray days. Larson would find reasons to stop by my desk, compliment my outfits, ask my opinion on things that made me feel important. When Graham barely looked up from his computer in the mornings, I had Larson's attention to look forward to. "You seem happier lately," Cleo observed one afternoon. "New moisturizer?" I laughed, but it felt forced. Just feeling appreciated at work for once. "Good for you. Graham should take notes from your boss on how to treat a woman." That evening, Graham confronted me about the overtime I'd been claiming. "Leah, your pay stubs don't match what you're telling me about hours. Are you sure you're tracking everything correctly?" The accusation in his voice made me defensive. "Are you questioning my honesty now? Maybe if you paid attention to anything besides your precious computers, you'd know I've been working on special projects." "I'm just trying to understand." "No, you're being paranoid and controlling. This is exactly why we have problems, Graham. You don't trust me, you don't support me, and now you're interrogating me like some kind of criminal." He stepped back, hurt flickering across his face. "I'm not. I just want to understand what's happening with us." "What's happening is that someone finally recognizes my worth, even if my own husband doesn't." That night, I deleted a particularly flirty message from Larson before Graham could see it, but the guilt felt different now, less like shame and more like excitement. I was playing with fire, and part of me liked the heat. The next morning, Maya asked why I was always gone now. "Mommy has important work to do," I said, kissing her forehead. "You understand, right? Sometimes grown-ups have to make sacrifices." But as I drove to work, her sad little face haunted me. Was I making sacrifices, or was I just being selfish? The line was getting blurrier every day. My phone buzzed with another message from Larson. "You looked beautiful yesterday. That dress was distracting." I smiled despite myself. When was the last time Graham had called me beautiful? When was the last time he'd been distracted by me in a good way? I was so lost in thought that I almost missed Graham's text. "Can I see your phone tonight? Want to show you something funny Derek sent?" My stomach dropped. The messages. The deleted history. The photos Larson had sent of restaurant recommendations that were definitely more romantic than professional. "Why do you need my phone for that?" I typed back, my hand shaking slightly. "Never mind. Just thought you'd enjoy the joke." But I could feel the suspicion in his words, even through text. Had he seen something? Did he know? That evening, I snapped at him when he asked to borrow my charger, claiming he was being invasive and untrusting. The fight that followed was vicious, with me accusing him of being a controlling husband, and him looking at me like he didn't recognize the woman he'd married. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Graham's steady breathing, I wondered if I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then I thought about Larson's smile, his compliments, the way he made me feel alive again. Graham had pushed me to this with his neglect. If he couldn't appreciate what he had, maybe it was time someone else did. The bistro was crowded, filled with the kind of people who mattered in our small social circle. I'd suggested the group dinner, knowing Larson would be there with some colleagues. It was the perfect opportunity to show everyone, especially Graham, that I was more than just a suburban housewife. Graham sat beside me in his usual khakis and polo shirt, looking uncomfortable as Larson regaled the table with stories from his business trips. I found myself laughing too loudly at Larson's jokes, leaning forward to show interest in a way I never did when Graham spoke. "Graham works in IT, I announced when someone asked about my husband's career. You know, turning computers off and on again. I giggled, expecting others to join in, but the table fell awkwardly quiet. Graham's jaw tightened. I actually specialize in cybersecurity for financial institutions. Right, sorry, I said, not feeling sorry at all. It's just so technical. I can never keep track of what you actually do. Larson jumped in smoothly. It is crucial these days, though I imagine it keeps you pretty busy, Graham. Leah's always working late at our office. We barely see enough of her. The comment hung in the air, loaded with implications that made my pulse race. I caught Larson's eye and smiled, feeling powerful and desired. Well, someone has to be the fun parent, I said, reaching over to squeeze Larson's arm playfully. Graham's always so serious about bedtimes and homework schedules. Structure is important for Maya, Graham said quietly, his voice strained. Oh, lighten up, I laughed. See what I mean? Everything's so serious with him. Maya needs to learn that life isn't just about following rules. Janice, Graham's mother, set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. Excuse me, I need some air. She left the table abruptly, her disapproval radiating like heat. Derek tried to smooth things over with a joke, but I could see the confusion in his eyes as he looked between Graham and me. Maya, who'd been coloring quietly beside Graham, pressed closer to her father. Daddy, can we go home? She whispered. Soon, sweetheart, Graham murmured, wrapping his arm around her protectively. The gesture annoyed me. Why was he always the good parent, the reliable one? Why couldn't he fight for me the way he protected Maya? Maya's fine, I said. She needs to learn to socialize. Right, honey? Maya shrank further into Graham's side, and I felt a flash of irritation. Even my own daughter was choosing him over me. After dinner, as we walked to our cars, Larson caught up with me in the parking lot. Your husband seems intense, he said, his hand brushing my lower back. He's always been like that. No passion, no spontaneity. Sometimes I wonder what I'm missing out on. Larson's smile was predatory. Life's too short to wonder, Eulalia. The drive home was silent except for Maya's soft snoring in the back seat. Graham's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. What was that about tonight? He finally asked. What was what about? You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of my family, in front of our daughter. I was just being social. Maybe if you made an effort to be more interesting, I wouldn't have to carry every conversation. Interesting? Leah, you were flirting with your boss in front of everyone. People were staring. You're being paranoid and jealous, which is actually kind of flattering since you usually act like I'm invisible. But even as I said it, I knew he was right. I had been flirting, openly, deliberately, and part of me had enjoyed watching Graham squirm. The next day, Cleo cornered me by the coffee machine. Honey, people are talking, she said, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. Last night was a lot, even for you. What's that supposed to mean? You know what it means. Larson's married, Leah. And you're married. This little flirtation thing you've got going is getting obvious. I felt my cheeks burn. There's no flirtation. We're colleagues, friends. Friends don't look at each other the way you two were looking at each other last night. Just be careful, okay? You've got a good thing with Graham. Don't throw it away for something that's probably just fantasy. But it didn't feel like fantasy. It felt real, electric, alive in a way my marriage hadn't felt in years. That night, I found Graham at his computer again, but this time he wasn't working. He was looking at bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, my phone records. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Trying to understand what's happening to my wife," he said without looking up. "Trying to figure out when you became someone I don't recognize. Maybe you never really knew me at all." He turned then, and the pain in his eyes almost broke my resolve. Almost. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been blind to a lot of things." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling down. If Graham was finally paying attention, maybe my plan was working. I went to bed that night feeling victorious, but I woke up to find Graham's side of the closet looking strangely empty. Just a few missing shirts, some underwear, his good shoes. My stomach clenched. Where was he going? And why did it feel like he was already gone? The day everything changed started like any other. Maya had been clingy that morning, asking why Daddy slept in the guest room now, why Grandma Janice wouldn't talk to me on the phone anymore. I brushed off her questions with promises of ice cream later, my mind already focused on the text from Larson asking me to stay late again. "Special project," he'd written. "Just you and me." Graham had taken Maya to his mother's for dinner, another pointed exclusion that stung more than I wanted to admit. Fine. If they wanted to treat me like the outsider, I'd find my validation elsewhere. The office was nearly empty by 6 p.m. I could hear the cleaning crew in the distance, but Larson's corner of the building felt isolated, private. When I knocked on his door, he was loosening his tie, looking every inch the successful executive I'd married Graham hoping he'd become. "Rough day?" I asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Better now," he said, his eyes traveling over me in a way that made my skin tingle. "You know, Eulalia, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, about what you might be missing. The air between us felt charged, dangerous. I knew I should leave, should go home to my family and try to repair what I'd been systematically destroying. Instead, I stayed. "Have you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood up, moved around the desk to lean against it directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Your husband doesn't appreciate what he has," Larson said, reaching out to touch my cheek. "If you were mine—" "But I'm not," I said, though I didn't pull away from his touch. "Aren't you? You're here with me instead of home with him. You light up when I compliment you, laugh at my jokes, dress for me in the mornings, tell me I'm wrong." He wasn't wrong. For weeks, I'd been choosing him over Graham, over Maya, over the life I'd built. And in that moment, with his hand on my face and his attention focused entirely on me, it felt like the most natural thing in the world to lean into his touch. What happened next felt inevitable, like we'd been building to this moment since that first late-night message. His lips on mine, his hands in my hair, the desk pushing against my back as months of frustration and neglect and longing crashed together in a wave of reckless abandon. Afterward, as I sat in my car in the parking lot, I felt simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Graham and a text. "Maya's asking for you. When will you be home?" I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, trying to fix my smudged lipstick and disheveled hair. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To feel desired, to matter to someone, to be more than just a wife and mother going through the motions. So why did I feel so empty? At home, Graham was reading to Maya in her bedroom. I could hear his gentle voice through the door, the sound of my daughter's laughter. Normal family sounds that felt foreign now, like I was observing someone else's life through a window. "Mommy!" Maya called when she saw me. "Daddy read 3 stories." "That's nice, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead and avoiding Graham's eyes. Later, after Maya was asleep, Graham tried to talk to me. "Leah, I know we've been having problems, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight with guilt. "Some things can't be fixed, Graham." "What does that mean?" I could have told him then, could have confessed, apologized, tried to rebuild what I'd torn down. Instead, I deflected. "It means you can't just decide to pay attention to me when it's convenient. You can't ignore me for months and then expect everything to be fine because you read Maya an extra bedtime story. I haven't been ignoring you, haven't you? When's the last time you really looked at me, Graham? When's the last time you made me feel like a woman instead of just your roommate?" He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to process my words, trying to understand when our marriage had become something he needed to fix instead of something we both cherished. "I love you," he said finally. "I've always loved you." "Love isn't enough," I said, and walked away. Over the next few days, I noticed changes. Graham was quieter, more watchful. He started asking questions about my schedule, my overtime, my sudden need for new clothes and makeup. When I snapped at him for being suspicious, he didn't fight back like he used to. He just watched me with those sad, knowing eyes. Janice confronted me at Maya's school pickup. "I don't know what game you're playing," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "But my son doesn't deserve this. That little girl doesn't deserve this." "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. "Don't you? The whole town is talking, Leah, about you and your boss, about how you humiliated Graham at that dinner, about how you're destroying your family for what? Attention? My marriage is none of your business." "It is when it affects my granddaughter. She asked me yesterday why Mommy doesn't love Daddy anymore. What am I supposed to tell her?" I didn't have an answer for that. I barely had answers for myself. That night, I found Graham packing a suitcase in our bedroom. "Where are you going?" I demanded. "Derek's for a few days. I think we both need some space to figure out what we want." "You can't just leave. What about Maya?" "Maya will be fine. I'll pick her up for school, drop her off after. You won't have to adjust your schedule." The calm way he said it, like he'd been planning this, made my blood run cold. "Graham, wait!" But he was already walking out the door, suitcase in hand, leaving me alone in the house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. The next morning, a certified letter arrived addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it, seeing the law firm letterhead, the formal language that made my affair feel suddenly real and consequential. "Dissolution of marriage," it read. "Irreconcilable differences." I sank onto the couch, the papers scattered around me, and realized that my wake-up call had worked perfectly, just not the way I'd intended. The law office smelled like leather and disappointment. I sat across from Graham's attorney, my own lawyer, shuffling through papers with the resigned air of someone who knew we were fighting a losing battle. "Mrs. Greaves," the attorney began, "my client has compiled substantial evidence regarding your extramarital affair. We'd like to give you the opportunity to respond before we proceed." Evidence. The word hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Graham, sitting calm and composed beside his lawyer, and barely recognized the man I'd married. Gone was the gentle, distracted husband who let me get away with everything. This Graham was methodical, prepared, and utterly done with my excuses. "I don't know what you think you have," I said, trying to sound confident. The attorney slid a folder across the table. "Text messages between you and Larson Bell, recovered from your phone's cloud backup. Security footage from your office building showing you leaving together multiple times. Credit card receipts from restaurants you claimed were work meetings, but show only 2 meals ordered." My mouth went dry as I flipped through page after page of evidence. Screenshots of messages I thought I'd deleted, timestamps that contradicted every lie I'd told, photos from social media that painted a clear picture of an affair I'd convinced myself was just harmless flirtation. "There's also this," Graham said quietly, speaking for the first time. He pulled out his phone and played a recording. My own voice from the night I'd come home late from Larson's office. "Some things can't be fixed, Graham. Love isn't enough." "You recorded me?" I whispered, feeling betrayed despite everything I'd done. "I recorded myself," he corrected. "I was trying to understand what I'd done wrong, where I'd failed as a husband. I wanted to analyze our conversations, figure out how to fix us. Instead, I documented the end of our marriage." The methodical way he'd gathered evidence, the careful documentation of my betrayal, showed me a side of Graham I'd never seen. The IT skills I'd mocked had been turned against me, and he'd built an airtight case while I was busy playing games. "Graham, please," I said, reaching for his hand. "We can fix this. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake. I was just trying to get your attention." He pulled his hand away. "By sleeping with your boss? By humiliating me in front of our friends and family? By lying to our daughter about where you were every night?" "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." His voice was steady, but I could see the pain underneath. "I have bank records showing you withdrew cash to pay for hotels. I have your car's GPS history showing trips to his apartment. I have testimony from your co-worker Cleo about conversations where you bragged about the affair." Cleo. My supposed friend, who'd encouraged my complaints about Graham, who'd warned me people were talking. She'd sold me out the moment Graham's lawyer contacted her. "She's lying," I said desperately. "She provided screenshots of your texts to her, including the one where you said, and I quote, 'Graham would die if he knew what Larson and I did in his office yesterday.' Maybe that would finally wake him up." The room spun around me. I'd sent that text in a moment of vindictive satisfaction, never thinking it would come back to destroy me. "You hired a private investigator," I accused. "I didn't have to," Graham said. "You weren't as careful as you thought. Every lie left a digital footprint. Every secret had a receipt. I just had to follow the trail you left." The attorney continued reading from the evidence file. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Mrs. Greaves and Mr. Bell, often late at night. Payroll records showing Mrs. Greaves claiming overtime on days when building security shows she left early. Credit monitoring alerts showing purchases at lingerie stores and expensive restaurants that Mr. Greaves didn't authorize. Each piece of evidence felt like a nail in the coffin of my marriage. I thought I was being clever, sneaky, playing a game where I held all the cards. Instead, I'd been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to my own destruction. "What do you want?" I finally asked. Graham's lawyer answered for him. "Primary custody of Maya, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Greaves until she completes counseling. Division of assets based on Mrs. Greaves's financial infidelity. Alimony will be minimal given the circumstances of the marriage's dissolution." "You can't take Maya from me," I said, panic rising in my chest. "I'm not taking her," Graham said. "I'm protecting her. From the chaos you've created, from the lies, from watching her mother destroy her family for attention. She needs her mother. She needs stability. She needs a parent who puts her first instead of using her as an excuse for bad behavior." The truth of his words hit harder than any evidence file. How many times had I justified my actions by claiming I was unhappy for Maya's sake? How many times had I used my daughter as a shield for my own selfish choices? "I want to call Larson," I said suddenly. "He'll tell you this was mutual, that Graham was neglecting me." "Mr. Bell has already been contacted," the attorney said dryly. "He's denied any inappropriate relationship and provided his own evidence showing Mrs. Greaves pursuing him despite his attempts to maintain professional boundaries." The betrayal was swift and complete. Larson, who'd whispered promises and made me feel special, had thrown me under the bus the moment his own marriage was threatened. "He's lying," I whispered. "Is he?" because we have security footage of you initiating contact, text messages showing you pursuing him, and witness testimony that you bragged about the affair while he remained discreet. I was drowning in the evidence of my own destruction, and the man I'd betrayed was watching calmly as I went under. Graham, please, I tried one last time. I love you. I love our family. It was all just a terrible mistake. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the ghost of the man who'd once loved me unconditionally. I know you think you love me, he said finally. But love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't use a child as an excuse for adultery. What you call love, Leah, looks a lot like selfishness from where I'm sitting. The papers were signed that day. Custody arrangements, asset division, the legal dissolution of everything I'd thought was mine forever. As I walked out of that office, I realized Graham had been paying attention all along. He'd just been paying attention to things that mattered: our daughter, our finances, our future. While I was playing games, he was building a case. And now I was about to lose everything I'd taken for granted while chasing something that was never real. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but it felt enormous as I sat at the defendant's table, watching my life be dissected by lawyers and judges who saw me as nothing more than a case number. Graham sat across the aisle with Maya beside him, her small hand clasped in his. She wouldn't look at me. Your Honor, my attorney began. Mrs. Greaves acknowledges that mistakes were made, but she's committed to rebuilding her relationship with her daughter and being a better co-parent moving forward. Mistakes were made. Even my own lawyer couldn't bring herself to say I'd had an affair, as if using passive voice could somehow minimize what I'd done. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked unimpressed. Mrs. Greaves, you had an affair with your supervisor, lied to your husband repeatedly, and used marital funds to finance your extramarital relationship. How do you respond to these allegations? I stood on shaking legs. Your Honor, my marriage was in trouble. I felt neglected, unappreciated. I made poor choices, but I was trying to save my family by getting my husband's attention. By committing adultery? I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted him to fight for me. The judge's expression didn't soften. Mrs. Greaves, adults in committed relationships communicate their needs through conversation, counseling, or if necessary, legal separation. They don't engage in affairs and then blame their spouse for driving them to it. Graham's attorney stood. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of the defendant's pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse. What followed was a parade of my worst moments, presented with clinical precision. Text messages where I'd gaslit Graham about his suspicions. Testimony from Janice about how I'd humiliated her son in public. School records showing Maya's declining grades and behavioral issues that coincided with my affair. Maya has been seeing the school counselor, the attorney continued, because she's been acting out in class and asking why her mommy doesn't love her daddy anymore. I wanted to object, to explain that everything I'd done was for Maya, to give her a better life, a happier mother. But the evidence painted a different picture, of a woman who'd put her own desires above her child's well-being, who'd destabilized her daughter's world for temporary validation. I'd like to call Maya to the stand, I said suddenly, ignoring my lawyer's sharp intake of breath. Absolutely not, Graham said, standing up. She's 8 years old. She doesn't belong in the middle of this. She's my daughter, too, I protested. She should have a say in where she wants to live. The judge looked disgusted. Mrs. Greaves, your daughter is a child who has already been traumatized by your choices. I will not allow you to further manipulate her by putting her in the position of choosing between her parents. But Maya spoke up anyway, her small voice carrying across the courtroom. I want to stay with Daddy. The judge's words echoed in my head long after the gavel fell. Primary custody to Graham, supervised visits for me, everything I'd built, gone. Maya clung to him, not me. "You're always gone," she'd cried. "You make him sad." She wasn't wrong. I'd spent so long chasing attention, I forgot what love looked like. Now, in my small apartment surrounded by boxes, her drawings stared back like ghosts. Graham texted, "Maya wants to know if you're okay." I wrote back, "Tell her mommy is learning to be better." It was the truth, finally. Outside, families laughed and lived the life I'd thrown away. Graham had paid attention while I played games. He'd been the steady one, the parent, the partner I failed to be. I looked at the divorce papers on my table, my signature below his, and felt the finality of it. Eulalia Greaves, the selfish wife, was gone. What remained was someone trying, at last, to learn how to deserve love again. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.